thank you very much for making time this afternoon to attend this webinar. I'm really excited about this particular release that we're delivering. This is the final part of the waste rating, and what's been happening over time is this has been about 2.5 years in the making, this particular aspect of the waste rating. And we released without this in the initial release back in July last year, because what we realised is that this was an addition. It was never going to reduce the ratings that we were rating under the NABERS waste system. It would only add to the rating. And what we've done over development time is actually incorporate this addition into the rating as it sits and into the benchmark as it exists. And I'll talk you through how we've done that as we progress. So moving on. So the first thing is to understand the problem that we are trying to solve. So as we all know, waste generation in Australia is growing at a compound annual rate of 6.2%, which is 6 times faster than population growth and about 2.5 times faster than our economic growth. And so we all know that waste is an issue and we would like to decouple that. And we're all across resource recovery as being an issue and circular economy as being something that we all want to support and help with. And I think what we're going to do with this material recovery score is enable commercial office buildings to in fact measure their contribution to a circular economy. And some of you may remember when I've done presentations in the past that I've talked about when we went and spoke to our stakeholders, the property sector, about their concerns with waste performance data. What they told us was that it wasn't granular, so they couldn't understand what it was their waste companies were giving them in terms of information so that they could then make practical on-site changes, that it was an inconsistent format, so they couldn't get data from one waste company and compare it with another waste company, so they didn't have a lot of confidence in what was happening, and they were unable to track their supply chain. And in a situation with supply chain risk being something that a lot of our corporates are really worried about, that was the thing that they wanted to have. Now, the first release of the waste rating solved the first 2 problems. It helped with the granularity of data, and it set out a consistent format so people could actually report properly. And with this release, what we're hoping to do is actually set up a way to enable practical tracking of supply chain data to the extent that it is feasible for a commercial building to do so, and to be able to use the NABERS method and the NABERS brand to be able to say to their waste companies, we would like this information because it will help us with our waste rating and is part of the method, so please supply it. Now, I've talked about all this. We all know right now that people really care about waste. The wrong waste happened and changed. Excuse me, more people are coming in. We had that conversation. Plastics in our ocean are a big issue, and then China changed the entire way that we exported waste matters and disrupted the entire industry. So we all know that people are talking about this particular issue right now. But what I find fascinating is that everyone's talking about it, but no one necessarily knows how to quantify the size of the problem and quantify what the outcomes might look like and talk about the quality of the outcome as well. Again, this is what we're trying to solve with this particular outcome, this particular adjustment. So, an overview of the material recovery score, or the MRS as it's become known around our office as we've been developing it. So it is a measure of the quality of the end-of-life outcome of waste leaving a commercial building. This is what we're trying to achieve. NABERS only measures what is within the building's control, and in the case of the waste performance, we are measuring the outcome of the waste leaving a commercial building. And it is a score that is allocated to those bin services that are included in the recycling calculation. How we've conceived of it is this. So the entire NABERS waste rating rolls in the following way. As you know, we will take input data from on-site scales, from scales on trucks, and from waste collection data in terms of bin counts or data company counts as well. That is our raw data. From there, we apply the density and contamination rates, which you as assessors should be collecting and verifying, and then inputting into the platform for the rating. And from that point, the various waste reports on the dashboard can be spat out, and it calculates the recycling rate. And then for the purposes of the rating, we apply that data quality adjustment, which is onto the recycling rate, which is that idea of excellent, good, acceptable, or basic data, depending on what sorts of information have been provided. What this does is we are then adding another multiplier onto it, the material recovery score, which sets up the rating, changes the rating based on the outcomes of those bins and where those bins went to. So the extent to which they were clean sorted, separated, where they've gone to, and what happened to them in that point. And I will give you some more detail about that in a minute. The final thing that happens is that we apply then a data quality to the information which was used to generate the material recovery score. And the reason that's important is I think that we are at the very start of trying to understand what a good waste supply chain looks like. We're at the very beginning of talking to waste companies about supplying good quality, transparent data and trying to drive information down the supply chain. And we know how hard that can be. So we don't want to set up a situation where it's the gold-plated version in the first year. We want to be able to say, come on a journey with us, start here, and then work with us as an industry to get to the point where we all have confidence in the transparency of the supply chain. We also know that in the current circumstances, getting information from a material recovery facility that then goes overseas can be quite difficult. So that's what the data quality score does. It sets out the sorts of information that's been provided and then applies an adjustment based on that. It's exactly the same as the other data quality score. So what is it trying to do? So the material recovery score, if you think about what happens to waste as it leaves the building, we are trying to hit this point in the supply chain over here. I can get this thing going. We are trying to hit this point over here. And what that means is, so waste leaves the building and gets onto a truck. And hopefully it doesn't go to landfill, but we do know that, of course, a whole bunch of the waste leaving commercial buildings goes to landfill. Some trucks take it to a material recovery facility where it gets further sorted. We are not trying to measure the material recovery facility. We acknowledge that waste transfer stations and material recovery facilities are part of the supply chain that gets it to the next stage. What we are instead trying to do is measure what happens to that material at the point it turns into something else. So either you've got organics waste and food waste turning into compost or going to anaerobic digestion. You have industrial materials going into reproduction or remanufacture. And you have some materials that are residual, allowed under law, going to energy production or fuel replacement. This is the point we're trying to hit in the supply chain. And when I talk about outcomes in what's called a recovery pathway, this is what we're looking at. Which of these stages did it get to and what was it turned into at this stage? So just keep this in mind as we're going through. Okay, so when we were designing this, we had a couple of things we needed to consider. So NABERS tries to be, as much as it can, a very practical tool that can be used by office building owners and building managers. So the first thing we needed was that this was easily understood. If I can't explain it to you and you can't explain it to your clients, then we've not done a good job. It needs to be transparent. People need to understand what it is and be able to see that the rates, the numbers that we've come up with and the reasons for those numbers are good and meaningful and purposeful and that makes sense to them. It also needs to be fair for the sector being rated, and I'll talk about that again in a minute. We also wanted to make sure that it didn't add large administrative overhead to rating companies like yourself or to recyclers, because what we don't want to do is create a situation where people don't get a waste rating because of supply chain, trying to chase down their supply chain. But instead we found the right balance between good information and overly onerous information. So we've been trying to be very careful in that space. And more importantly, that it's replicable within the NABERS team. So it doesn't rely on paying a consultant to update every time we're presented with a new facility. It doesn't rely on someone with extensive experience like myself to create and come up with a result every time we're presented with a new facility. So it's facility independent, but not treatment method independent. And for my sins, I spent 2 days coming up with about 246 permutations of a recovery pathway. So I think we've covered up on everything we can possibly do. What we've come up with instead is this, that's the design principles. What we also wanted to do with this was make sure that we were talking to the environmental benefits of resource recovery and the environmental benefits of the circular economy and making sure that we were pushing into that space. So what we've come up with is making sure it incentivizes clean material streams that can be recovered and turned into new materials. We want to make sure it's incentivizing upcycling versus downcycling. And I'll explain that again in a bit. And we want to make sure we're incentivizing reduced overall pollution, including reduced carbon emissions, which of course is at the heart of what NABERS ratings are all about. We want to disincentivize pollution and we want to disincentivize low quality recovery. For example, trying to turn paper into fuel. So this is what we considered when we were building what's coming up. One of the things that NABERS is very, very strong on is that we reward improvement in elements within a building's control. And what we know based on feedback from our technical working group is that the elements a commercial building owner has control over is whether their contracts and management practices are likely to result in an item going to best possible reuse, and that they have the abilities to support specialist resource recovery collections and technologies. They don't have control over the commodities market, regulation of the waste industry, where the facilities are located, and whether a given facility will take their waste on a particular day. So again, in designing this material recovery score, what we have done is wait for the first 2 dot points on the left-hand side and not penalise a building for factors on the right-hand side that they do not have control over. We expect them to be part of the conversation. We expect to represent the property sector in this conversation in various forums. But we're not going to rate an individual building on its ability or lack of ability to affect the commodities market downstream from their building. So here's what happened. I talked about trying to make sure it was all correct and easy to understand and transparent and was the right format. So what we've done is 2 years ago, we started with a life cycle assessment methodology. We thought, well, that's the most robust method of measuring impact. So we will go to life cycle assessment. We did some pilot studies, we did some pilot information, we assessed the situation, and then I looked at the results, and the results were good. But I realized that any person who is in charge of NABERS waste would probably spend their career arguing with the life cycle assessment community as to whether the results were correct or not. And I think we've all got better things to do at that time than do that. So we came back to the concept of easily understood and transparent and realized that a multi-criteria analysis or a multi-criteria system was probably going to work better and would allow us to come up with the results we were after. We threw a bunch of criteria at the wall. We threw things like innovation and carbon emissions in particular, and we threw one other one at the wall and played around with the numbers, and then realized the 3 things that made the most difference for the kinds of recovery pathways we have is whether the bin is a single material type, which does not need to be further separated by mechanical means, or whether the contents of the bin need to be further separated. So think about the difference between a pure paper stream bin or a yellow bin with mixed recycling in it. That's the first thing that we thought about. And the reason for that is that the clean material stream bin is likely to have a higher value, is likely to have those materials able to be collected for recycling and for reprocessing, more so than stuff that's put into a mixed stream bin where you will almost inevitably have some contents of that bin going to landfill. So we would like to incentivize that, acknowledging that more trucks on roads aren't necessarily a good thing. So we need to find a good balance here, but we've put that in there. We also want to incentivize high quality recovery. So in this instance, what we're talking about is the extent to which the material goes to a higher order recovery in line with the waste hierarchy and circular economy principles. And I'm really excited about this bit because it means that we are putting the waste hierarchy into the material recovery score. And the waste hierarchy is acknowledged in the legislation of every single state in this country. And if we didn't have it in our rating, then we would be missing a trick. So how we're going to sort that out is, I should have actually talked about the point system. So the material recovery score allocates 6 points per bin type for the outcomes. And I'll show you some examples later. But it's 2 points for each of these 3 areas. And so the maximum is 2. So it's either 2, 1, or 0. We don't have half points or anything like that. It just gets too confusing. So clean material stream, 2 points if it's bin that's pre-sorted, 1 where it is in a mixed recycling bin, and 0 points for another bin type that we may add on in future. High quality recovery. It's 2 points for anything that looks like reuse or refurbishment. 1 point for anything which is like-to-like remanufacturing. So consider a PET being turned back into a PET bottle, glass being turned back into a glass container, those sorts of things where it's just straight across the line. And it's 0 points for energy recovery. So what this material recovery score is also allowing us to do is to acknowledge that the policy landscape and practices around waste management in this country are shifting, and that energy recovery is becoming a pathway that building owners are seeking to pursue. And if we can't include them in the rating, then we are not doing a justice to the commercial building sector. But any bin service that goes down that pathway will end up with 0 points for the energy recovery. So the recycling will still get counted, but they won't get a good score in the material recovery score. So it shifts the rating as a result. I'm happy to explain that a bit more later. I'm not sure I've covered that in this particular seminar, so maybe if we've got questions at the end, I can cover up on that one a little bit better. Our final one is pollution potential, and again, I think this is really important. So we looked at the extent to which the use of the material or not capturing the material effectively would pollute into air, land or water. So we looked at things like soft plastics having 2 points, because there is a high likelihood that if a soft plastic is not captured through a system, it is liable to pollute into waterways. Any organics going into anything other than compost or anaerobic digestion, composting and anaerobic digestion have 2 points, because organics going into landfill is the biggest contributor of carbon emissions from the waste sector. So we want to be able to incentivise and promote composting and anaerobic digestion, so that we make sure that those really important organics do not go into landfill to the best that we can. So to incentivise commercial building operators to get a single organic stream. We then allocated 0 points to any recovery pathway with a strong potential to incur pollution to air, land or water. So again, this is where energy recovery or process engineered fuel or anything like that, even if the facility is meeting its requirements by the EPA, and we acknowledge that if they're meeting the requirements from the EPA, then they are a properly licensed facility being properly managed, there is still a potential for that to incur pollution. So we would give that 0 points. And then after doing those 2 splits, everything else got 1 point. Again, always happy to explain this, by the way, as we move forward. This is not something you need to know as an assessor in detail. We've done all of the calculations on this, and there is a spreadsheet that you can use which will tell you what the number is for any given recovery pathway. But for those of you who are like myself, who's a bit of a circular economy nut, very happy to explain why we've made these decisions for each of those recovery pathways and what the numbers are. I keep talking about recovery pathways. Here's a few. This is what we did. A recovery pathway is a description of the material as it leaves the building and what happens to the material the next stage in its life cycle. So for instance, you've got glass, so looking at the top, you've got glass containers from a pre-sorted bin. One of them turns into a new glass container product. One of them is crushed for sand replacement. So what the material recovery score says is that those are both good outcomes, but the new glass container product with 4 points is better than one with the crushed for sand replacement with 3 points. 3 points is still a good outcome, because you think on a bandwidth of 6 points total, it's there smack bang in the middle. And the reason it's 3 points is because it's got points for being a pre-sorted bin, it's got points for that recovery, and it's got points for the pollution potential. So that's how that one's come together. I think it's just the pollution potential. Showing you a plastic example for PET. Again, so this might be PET that's gone through a yellow bin. And so it's got a mixed content bin, it's PET. One type has turned into a new PET product, so that's where a PET bottle has gone back to a new PET bottle as well. One's been downcycled. So that bale, I've got another participant coming in. So that bale may have been sent into a mixed plastic outcome for, say, street furniture, or to go into bumpers at fast food restaurants, which we know is currently happening. So again, we acknowledge that that is an important part of the circular economy, and with the plastics problem that we currently have, we need to be able to find ways of incentivizing that rather than it going straight to landfill. This is still all better than landfill, but that we would prefer to see precious PET turned back into PET rather than mixed together in an aggregate form that cannot be recovered in the future. So that's what we consider to be downcycling. And the final thing is plastics, PET, that goes into some form of incineration, again, potentially turned into process engineered fuel and put into a cement kiln. Gets 0 points. So again, we acknowledge that this is a pathway which is still better than landfill, but it only gets 0 points. I might actually, while I'm talking about this, say that the rules we are releasing state that the plastics bin, which is going to the PEF facility, has to have less than 17% plastics in it, which is about making sure that we're not incentivizing the burning of fossil fuels, which is what a plastic is, but acknowledging that sometimes that's what you need to do. So again, I'll talk about that at the end. Finally, looking at food waste. So you'll see we've got a couple of our 6 pointers here, one of which is a source separated clean organic stream that's gone to anaerobic digestion is 6 points. It's topped it out across the board. Whereas composted is 5 points. It's got not quite as many benefits as anaerobic digestion in our opinion, but it's still a very good thing because 5 points is still very good. And where you've got a food donation service where someone's coming and picking up your catering and taking that on to feed hungry people, then we also think that is a really good outcome from a circular economy perspective. And again, you'd get 6 points. So that's how you read a recovery pathway. So what you're looking for as an assessor is you're looking for what sort of bin is it in, what type of material is it, and then you're going to go looking for evidence for what was the outcome of that material as far down the supply chain as you can get, so you can get to the point you can come up with the sorts of words that you're seeing on the screen here. Okay, so the question I get from assessors and the question I got from our technical working group the entire time was, this is all fabulous, but how does it affect the rating? And the hurdle that we had to jump through to make sure this was signed off by our director, Carlos Flores, was, how does this affect the rating? So I thought I'd show you exactly what happens. This is an average building, and in fact, it's the building we use for demonstrating the outcome of the waste rating to our assessors and to anyone else who's asking. So it's a 3-star building with a 35% recovery rate. And I've generated this off our test server, and it has already been incorporated into the existing benchmark. There is no change. If you do nothing with the material recovery score, you will get exactly the same result as you have been getting in the previous benchmark. And the reason that we've done this, so we've set up the calculation so it works like that. The reason that we did this was we took the benchmark in the years 2016 to 2017. So that was the financial year that we sliced data to create our industry average benchmark. Now, that's before China decided to change its legislation and disrupt the entire waste industry. This is before most buildings were considering doing anything other than, I have a general waste building, a mixed recycling building, a paper/cardboard collection, and maybe a couple had organics. When we went back and looked at the buildings that we got data for, that was pretty much the suite. We had very few organics collections, we had very few specialist collections in that benchmark. So we knew that the benchmark is set pretty much looked like what waste recovery in Australia looked like at the time. And we also knew from research that most materials were being dealt with in the same way. So at that point we went, we can set this material recovery score as being part of the existing benchmark by establishing what the values of each of these streams would have been in 2016, 2017. So that's what we've done, which I think is quite good. So it means we don't have to go back and change any of the ratings that have been done to date. And it means that moving forward, if your clients decide they don't want to do this, then we have incorporated this in the benchmark. They don't get the benefits, but then they don't have to do it. Let me show you what happens though if you actually do some work on the material recovery score. So case one, what we did is I should also say, in order to generate this, what we had to do was establish what the standard values were for the material recovery score. So in the same way that we have standard values for contamination and standard values for density, we also have a standard value for every single recovery pathway for the bin types which are most commonly seen on the platform. So for instance, for a yellow bin, it's 2.87, for a paper bin, it's 5, etc. So we've established those and they will be published in the next version of the rules coming out on September 30. So you can find those out. But we would prefer you had building specific information. So we have capped the increase at approximately half a star. So if you do work on the material recovery score, you can attain up to an extra half a star on top of the rating. It does depend on which streams you run for because it is weighted to the weight of that particular stream. So it might be more beneficial to chase organics. It might be more beneficial to chase paper, but I'm not sure you're going to get much more benefit from paper because that is already a 5-pointer and that won't change much. But chase those ones and chase evidence. So the first case is I didn't change those material recovery score values at all. And I chose the lowest possible evidence outcome that we allow, which is that there is a statement from the waste collection company that they received the materials and it probably went somewhere. Sorry, probably went somewhere specific. I'll get to the specifics of data quality in a bit. But essentially, the minimum that you would need to do some due diligence on your supply chain, in the case of this particular building, bumped it up half a star. The next case is where they investigated the mixed bin content, so changed what was happening with that mixed bin content and received a statement from the waste company of endpoint. Again, that's half a star. Now, I will say that what happens is it may not show as half a star in case one. I think what was happening was this particular building was on the cusp of the benchmark, so it shifted over, whereas case two is a more solid extra half a star. But what I'm really excited by is case number 3. So case number 3 is where this building, this one, which as you can see, has a very tiny organics collection in the final 4 months, has actually managed to get a really good organics collection. Again, I've made this bit up, but I did go and look at some of our existing buildings and what they're managing to achieve with organics. So they've managed to target organics in that building and get it into a clean stream and sent it off to an anaerobic digester. They have managed to get a chain of custody level evidence for those organics because it's more straightforward, it's probably going within state, so it's easy to do. And everything else has been left as per case 2. And you can see for the combination of targeting organics, so getting organics out of the general waste and into the recycling figure, and chasing this material recovery score, you've got an extra 2 stars on that waste rating, which for me is very exciting. It means we're talking about circular economy. It means we're starting to document circular economy. But more importantly, we can drive organics out of general waste, which is the thing which is contributing to carbon emissions from commercial office buildings in this country in terms of their waste profile. So if we do nothing else with this particular rollout, but change the face of organics collection in this country from office buildings, I will be so happy and excited. I hope you are as well. So, what do you need to do as an assessor, which is the million-dollar question, and things that you'll need to think about as we roll forward. I just mentioned briefly that this will be released on September 30, so you've got about a week and a half for this to be released. As I've said though, if you've already got ratings in training, or already doing work on ratings, or you've costed up or quoted for ratings, you don't have to change that job. The benchmark will not change for those ones. You may wish to go back to your clients and say there is this opportunity to investigate further. That is up to you, but here's what you will need to do going forward. You will need to establish that you'll need to work out that 70% or more of the collections for that bin service, the destination can be established. So that means that the waste collection company says, yes, we took those bins to one of the following 4 facilities: a recovery or reprocessing facility, a materials recovery facility, a registered charity, or a transfer station. And I have to tell you which one it is with the address and the ABN and their license number. So this will be required under the rules. If they won't do that, or they can't do that, then that bin service cannot get a building specific material recovery score. So that is the first hurdle. We want you to talk to waste collection companies, or building owners to talk to waste collection companies and say, please provide us with evidence that 70% or more collections of that bin service went to one of these facilities. Now we've set the number at 70%. I'm happy to take feedback on this, by the way. Again, because we are trying to change an industry. 70 might not be the right number, and we might tighten that over the next couple of years. But right now we're going to start with 70 and see how we go with that particular outcome. And certainly I welcome feedback, practical feedback on how effective this has been and the extent to which we could possibly tighten that number up a lot more. As an assessor, you will also be required to verify that what the waste collection company is telling you, in the same way that we do with second source of data and bin counts, you'll need to go and get some primary evidence. So that's tipping dockets, and there is a method for checking the tipping dockets. It's very similar to second source of data. There will be a randomized sample of tipping dockets that you will need to check against what they say happened. And if it passes, the same way that data quality passes, then a building specific material recovery score can be put into the platform for that bin service. So you need to check every single bin service. In order to get the building specific material recovery value, you need to establish the most likely outcome for the contents of the bin. And then this relates directly to the data quality. So ideally, we would like chain of custody level documentation that follows the material through each stage of the supply chain until it reaches that point of reuse or reprocessing. We think this is achievable for organics. We think this is probably achievable for some scrap metal in this country, particularly aluminium cans going to an aluminium smelter. We acknowledge this is probably not achievable for materials in a mixed recycling bin. But this is where we would like to go, and this is where we would like to start, and we still do think that is the best outcome from a supply chain perspective. If that is not possible, then a statement from a waste aggregator of the most likely endpoint based on their sales of that material is the next level of data quality that we will accept. So say you go to the material recovery facility and you say, what do you do with your paper? And they say, based on our sales, X% of our paper ends up down at the Albury paper mill, then that's great. That means you've got a statement that says that the paper ends up at the paper mill. Or X% of our paper gets shipped overseas and goes to this particular facility. That's what we mean by a statement from the waste aggregator. So you don't have to chase that from a chain of custody level documentation, but it is a statement from that aggregator about what happens based on their sales, and it must be on their letterhead and signed off by them. We will accept, because we know it's hard right now and because we know that the waste industry is changing, but still broadly everything is mostly looks the same. So we will accept research into overall trends in the Australian waste management with justification for your decision to choose a specific value. So we're not blocking around choosing a specific value, but we do want to know how you've come up with that decision. Again, this will affect the data quality, but we will allow this to happen in this rating, and we'll see over time we may change that where some material recovery streams won't have that as an option, but right now we're allowing that for all options going forward. I was going to show you how to calculate it. So we have a spreadsheet that will allow you to determine what the points are for each of the recovery values. This will be available from the website on September 30 for you to download and use. And what it does is you scroll down and find the material type that you are trying to assess. So let's say you've got e-waste happening. So you're looking at pre-sorted bin because you have an e-waste bin on site which your tenants have been using. The material type you're looking for is, no, this one's broken. Let's use a different one. Apologies on that one. Here we go. Got a pre-sorted bin for organics. You have a mixed food waste collection coming out of your building, and you know that it is going through an Orca machine, for instance. And what this tells you is that the material recovery score points for that recovery pathway is 5. But if, on the other hand, this was going to biofuel, oh, not an option. Oh. So not an option. What this tells you is that this is not a recovery pathway that we have recognised. If you think this is a valid material recovery pathway, please get in contact and we can update this spreadsheet. And this is why this is a spreadsheet, because it is much quicker and easier for us to update this spreadsheet than to try and update our platform. But that gives you a hint. So if it generates an NA, that means it is not a valid resource recovery pathway and we have not generated points for it. Let's go with that one. Also not. Okay, that's not working. We're doing more tech checking on this spreadsheet before we release it. We'll make sure it works properly. But that is what you do. So again, let's go over here for some. So mixed recycling, you've got a mixed, it goes into a mixed paper and cardboard. The outcome is that it's been turned into a new mixed paper and cardboard and gets 4 points. So you can see it's as simple as that. You go through. You'll be required to upload this spreadsheet as part of the rating evidence, and it will be joined to the data verification spreadsheet. So it's just going to be one spreadsheet for NABERS waste, and this will be one of the tabs in that spreadsheet. I'll come back to this in a few minutes. I'm going to show you something else with it, but let's move back over here. Now, I'm speaking about data quality, and I want to show you what our data quality map is for the various types of evidence coming out. Again, you read this, if you're used to reading the data quality diagram for the waste rating itself, you should be able to read this. I'm going to start at the top. So what we want to see is that you have actually investigated the resource recovery pathway and that there is a building specific value. That's what the top line says. Versus the resource recovery pathway has not been investigated and you can't use a building specific value, so you've used NABERS standard values. Again, that's where that 70% threshold kicks in. If you haven't been able to tip the 70% threshold, then it automatically bumps down to the bottom line. Some bins will require a composition audit value or composition value. So think about a mixed recycling bin with a variety of contents inside it. We want to know what percent is aluminium cans, what percent is tin cans, what percent is PET bottles, HDPE bottles, glass containers, paper, cardboard, etc. So like the rest of the NABERS waste method, we don't require anyone to do that, complete that information. But if that information is there, then it gets a higher level of data quality. If the information is not there, then it bumps down to the next level. So that's the split in terms of that decision point. We acknowledge that not all bins will require that. So the organics bin I'm using as an example does not require a composition audit. So you can see that there are bins where this is not required. So it's only where there's bins where you as an assessor know that that particular bin goes to a secondary sorting facility, so usually a material recovery facility. If all of the if all of the contents of the bin go to the same outcome, you don't need to complete a composition audit. So it's just so we can get different levels of material recovery scores for the contents of that bin. And then I've talked you through the quality of evidence. So chain of custody level, evidence of next collection point, and that statement from the aggregator, or just evidence of next collection point. So those are the ways that you split that up. So when you're advising your clients on data quality, you can show them this split and help them understand where they can hit. I think our benchmark has assumed that everyone can get to D relatively. In fact, everyone can get to D if they put effort in, and they can get that outcome. So I think our benchmark has pitched that half a star increase at the level C. So you're aiming for C and above in order to get that increase. If you're aiming for D, you'll get some increase like I showed you in the example, but you may not get to the half star. So you're probably aiming for C or above, which you can get in 2 different ways if you follow the pathways properly. Okay, composition audits and mixed bins. So you need to get, where a bin has contents, that will get sorted into other things. Then we need to change it from one bin into a variety of material types. It's relatively simple, straightforward. What we will require you to do is a composition audit. So this is the next step after the contamination audit. So the first thing you need to do is get rid of any contamination in that bin, weigh the contamination and use that for your contamination results. What you'll then do is split the remaining contents into the material streams that you know you're scoring for, weigh each of those portions, and then input it into that spreadsheet that I showed you. So I'll just go back and show you that spreadsheet and I'll show you how that's set up. Again, there is a method for this audit in our rules. You can have a read of that method. So here we go. We have established what standard values will look like. So if you have a mixed recycling bin and you manage to get the recovery points but cannot do a composition audit, which is what that green pathway on the data quality was about, you can use these %. So these are the NABERS standard % splits for the mixed recovery bin. So you would use this spreadsheet and you would go, so my plastics are 4, establish that, whereas my mixed plastics are a 2, again, because you've used this part of the spreadsheet to establish these, and then you move them over to this one. We will put this onto the one page when the final release, by the way, so don't worry about having to copy and paste across. Aluminium cans are a 5, tin cans are a 4, my paper and cardboard is a standard 5, and my glass containers are a 2. What that does is it tells you what number you will need to input into the material recovery score input page. So 3.45 versus the standard 2.87. Where you have done your research into your material recovery points and you've done a composition audit, then you would use this table down here to generate the number, and you'd add or subtract however many columns you need, but this number must add up to 100%. And again, we will require you to upload this information. So now you've done all the homework, you've done your homework, you've sorted out your paperwork, you've found where things are going, you've completed composition audits, and now it's time to come to the rating page and input the rating page. So the first thing you'll see is there's a toggle asking you if the rating will include a material recovery score values or not. You hit yes, it's relatively straightforward. You'll then be presented with this screen where you can input for whichever streams you have the value for, the value of the material recovery score value, and where the situation with regard to the composition values. I think it defaults to NA, it should default to no. So we will be checking this particular aspect in our level 1 audit and probably updating that coding in the future. So just so you know, so pay attention to where that radio button ends up. You'll then be presented with this screen where you get a drop down which asks for what type of evidence was used to collect that information. So what evidence you used to establish what the number is. And we will ask you for some words to describe the sources of evidence, and for any value that is 5 or 6 to give us even more detailed information, because we're quite sensitive about 5s and 6s because they have the potential to push that the rating up quite high. So those are the ones we're particularly interested in, but we do want to have a good understanding from you of how you have come up with that number. Those are the input screens. We're almost done. So in summary, the material recovery score is live on September 30. So on September 30, the platform will be updated so it generates the rating. We will put the new rules live onto our website. The spreadsheet will go up live, but as per any rule change, we will make sure we email you directly with the new rules, a track change version so you can see what changes have been made, and we will send you the spreadsheet directly. So you don't need to check the website. You will receive an email from myself or my colleague Ian with that aspect. From September 30, it will be applied to all ratings, But as I've said, if nothing changes, then the rating itself should not change its star band in any way, shape or form. What we're really excited about and what we hope you tell your clients about is that it measures supply chain impacts and it measures their contribution to a circular economy. And the higher that number, the more their contribution is there. And I think that they can then start talking about how they are improving resource recovery and improving circular economy outcomes. And I must say, if anyone can come up with good methods for measuring avoidance, I am all ears because I want to hear about those ones as well. So how do we carefully and fairly manage avoidance, which is the thing that we currently can't measure? I would love to know about it. Do keep in mind that building specific values will require information on more than 70% of the collections for that bin service. And that's a really important thing. If you can't meet that binary, that threshold, don't bother going any further, just get that one done. And you'll need to download a spreadsheet in order to determine the values. So that's everything I want to tell you today. We're really excited about the release. There will be a module put up on NABERS Learn with all of this information available. This webinar has been recorded, so we will make that available to you as well, because I know this has been a lot of information to take in this time period. And I want to make sure that you are as well educated as you can be. I am always happy to get questions via phone or email, or to have a coffee in person, particularly if I'm in your city at any point in time, and very happy to explain all of this. Thank you all very much for your attention, and I look forward to talking to you all about the exciting world of material recovery scores and circular economies later.